I can't believe it's been a year. And we met discussed your plans at the Hope Lodge in Burlington, which was just coming online after COVID. So we kind of know what you were planning to do. How is it going now?
Yeah, so it has been a little more than a year and a few days. So we're right on the mark. I'm just thrilled with what we've been able to accomplish in this last year. I would say that we've gone through what a textbook business school would call true transformation, of taking the things that are exceptional about the organization and aligning them so that we can accelerate even further on our mission to improve the lives of cancer patients and families. We know where we want to go. We are speeding in that direction and just delighted by the impact mostly that we've been able to make across the country.
But is it going along the kind of on schedule? Is it proceeding as planned?
I'm so glad you asked that. No one loves a strategic plan more than I do. And that's something that we commenced developing, that this actually months before I got in the door. I started working nights and weekends with the executive team to stand up what our plan would be. It's terrific that we have the goal to improve the lives of cancer patients and their families, but that has to be measurable, and there has to be a business structure as a way to get there. So the first part of the strategic plan was to stand up that structure. So we are now organized into those units that we talked about last year: advocacy, patient support, and discovery. So those units each have their own component of the strategic plan of what it is that they own, and all of it laying on the foundation of our commitment to health equity. So every component of our strategic plan, irrespective of the pillar, is aligned to reducing a cancer disparity, a particular cancer disparity, or our overall goal to enhance cancer equity and health equity.
But it's, I guess I've always thought of ACS, and I've been covering it for more than 30 years, depending on, and I've never really understood it. But now.
My goal is to make that easier.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think I think the way I would describe it is in the following, again, because I believe in things that need to be measured. So our discovery team continues to be a foundation of the American Cancer Society. The intramural program is the one that sets the single book of truth for the nation on cancer incidence, cancer mortality, cancer trends. That's just one of the things that happens in the extramural program. Of course, there are other gems there, such as the cohorts that identify new factors that are contributing to cancer risk. So the intramural program remains the mainstay of ACS, and it lives within the discovery pillar. But our extramural program, wherein we are the largest nonprofit funder of cancer research outside the US government, is now starting to think differently under our new chief science officer about what is the kind of science that ACS could and should be funding, the kind of science that NCI can't do or doesn't have the bandwidth to do, given the small or the relatively low pay line. What are the things that will be the most impactful across the cancer continuum that we've defined as our scope of work? Prevention and screening, through detection, through treatment, through survivorship, which as we continue to improve outcomes for cancer, we've got to shift to, but also through bereavement, because the caregiver is one of our key stakeholders, the patient and their family. So across that cancer continuum, what are the things that we at the American Cancer Society are uniquely positioned to fund? That's where we've shifted our line of sight. So expect different things from the American Cancer Society. We want to fund the most impactful breakthrough that we are uniquely positioned to do. And so that's underneath discovery. But discoveries, we know, are not enough. There has to be access to care, and our access to care comes through advocacy. So the advocacy pillar under Lisa Lacasse and team, which is ACS CAN, and it's our 501c4, is informed by all the things that are happening in our discovery pillar, things that we fund or things that we become aware of that others have funded, and leads to strategies across the nation that are uniquely intended to enhance access to these new breakthroughs. For example, the biomarker testing, which we were very thankful that you wrote an article about. So going state by state to ensure that the Medicaid plans include coverage for biomarker testing, knowing that so many of these new therapeutics that we just heard about at ASCO require or recommend biomarker testing, yet only single-digit percentages of individuals are getting access to these in many states. So, advocacy sets its priorities based on what we learned from discovery. That's the intertwine. And then the third and final pillar comes through, mission execution pillar comes through in the form of patient support. And this is simply born out of our impatience in the cancer continuum that too many patients fall through the gaps. So we see ourselves there as filling the voids in the cancer continuum where no one else will, by setting up prevention and screening plans. And then for those patients 5,000 communities across the country, but also for those patients who've been diagnosed with cancer, ensuring that they can complete their care to the best of ability through transportation, through lodging at our 31 Hope Lodges and beyond, through education. We firmly believe that empowering patients to be their own best advocate can help them get the care they need, but also through new programs that we stood up through our new patient support officer, like navigation. We know navigation is something that is so critical for improving outcomes, yet is not reimbursed. And, so I would close in saying ACS works like this. It's the parable of navigation. We know through research we and others have funded that it makes a difference in patient outcomes and also patient-reported outcomes. We know through our patient support pillar, the patients aren't being navigated in many sites across the country. So we feel compelled to go fill that void and go do it. But at the end of the day, the answer is always going to be advocacy, because our advocacy team will learn and be informed by what happened in research, in our discovery team, and what happened when we are touching 55 million patients every year through our patient support team. And that becomes a priority for advocacy, to have navigation become a reimbursable component of healthcare. So I use that as an example, and I hope it explains ACS. It's what I call the magic of ACS. It's when all of these things work together in a way that measurably improves life. That's how we make our strategic choices.
I didn't mean my previous question to sound snide.
Oh no, I didn't. I take it in stride. It's all good.
No, I'm not apologizing either. I did not mean it to sound snide, because there's actually a point there, which is the American Cancer Society evolved over like many, many years in its own way. The rest of the universe evolved differently. So there was this gap that emerged, and you were hired, I always thought, in order to bridge these gaps. So I'm building up to a question, believe it or not. You're a scientist, and you're a science administrator, and you're a cancer center director. Have you been able to keep those identities going, both as a scientist and a center director, and center directors are your peers?
Yeah, it's something that actually is really important to me. And yeah, I think the answer is yes. An example is still being highly integrated into the cancer community. So while I no longer have my own laboratory at Jefferson, all those projects have been completed and grants handed off. I look back on those years as some of the best years of my life, of understanding how to develop science priorities based on what's happening in the clinic, because that was my style. And then to bring those problems back and put them back into the clinic in a form of a potential answer in clinical trial. So I'd like to think that I have an understanding of what a translational scientist is facing and can help contribute to the discovery pillars concepts of what creates a priority. But I stay fresh in a number of ways. So I still am on the external advisory board of 12 NCI designated cancer centers. And I think that that's an important component of my job. It lets me know where their challenges lie. Their priorities become our priorities. The vast majority of dollars at ACS go back out to the major centers, because that's where the research is happening. It's where the clinical trials are happening. It's where the patients are being treated. So themselves and their related healthcare systems are the recipient of not all, but quite a lot of ACS funding. So understanding their priorities is key. To have these formal relationships through external advisory boards, but I've also traveled the country to go see them. So I've now seen 22 cancer centers sitting down to talk to them about what their priorities are for research, for advocacy, and for patient support, and also to make sure that we have the same touch points. So that's one way of staying fresh. Another is staying engaged in the science discovery component on its own. So we just came back from a very thrilling week at ASCO, learning about new discoveries and using that to understand what are patients going to need from a 3-pillar strategy for us. And then I guess I would finally say, I was really delighted this year to be the keynote speaker at ASCO GU. This is my meeting, right? These are my people in the GU space, and endeavor to collaborate within my own team, within the intramural program at ACS, to look through trends in cancer incidence and cancer mortality for the GU cancers. We identified some really new, surprising features of what's happening in GU cancers across demographics and across geographies, and we'll be writing that up. So look for me to still be publishing, but in potentially different ways as the years go on.
How many hours are in your day? Is it 24 or is it 48 or what's a day?
What's a day? Oh boy. A day is long, it never ends. In truth, last night we were waiting on a vote in South Dakota that we had been advocating for a particular, or actually against a particular amendment, which we felt would get in the way of enhancing access to cancer care in that state. And I was up at 1 o'clock in the morning waiting for that vote to come in. So it depends on the day, but the days are long, but they feel full of energy. It is overwhelming. A day is early and into late, but I have to say I'm very thankful for my family that feels like part of the ACS executive team sometimes. Even our 18-year-old son, last night said to me, "Mom, when's that vote coming in South Dakota?" So, they know what's going on. And I just, I'm very thankful for my home team, and I'm thankful for my ACS team because everyone's leaned in pretty hard.
The pillars idea, when was that born? Was it during your interviewing for this job? Because you couldn't, there was no reason for it to be there before. Maybe we should talk about them a little bit more and,
Sure.
How that evolved or, yeah.
Well, I fully believe, again, as a kind of a business person, that form has to follow function. So we needed to decide what it is that we wanted to achieve. So that started to develop in the 2 months that I was leaving Jefferson and coming back up to ACS, and had a lot of time, again, nights and weekends to spend with the executive team members at the time. So we circled around first, what's the mission? We want to measurably improve lives. And then as I started to understand how ACS lived, I realized that there were things where, arguably the advocacy pillar was already fully intact. It stands almost identically to how it was today. But what was not clear to me was how some of the other activities were truly organized. And so through that fact finding, then the pillar concept started to come. So I had alluded to the board during the interview process that it was unlikely that the current structure would stand from what I knew, but that I would do due diligence and determine what the structure would be that would allow us to maximally get to where we want to go. So soon after joining ACS and having done that due diligence is when the pillar concept came together. So, the discovery pillar was an easier one to tick and tie. And really streamline. So it's focused on science, and what is the science so that we can accelerate what we're doing there. And then soon after came the formation of the patient support pillar, I would say a couple of months after I had started. And so I had the pleasure of leading. It needed someone to start to pull it together strategically, with the concept of truly understanding what are all the touch points. We did due diligence ourselves. What are all the touch points across the country where we interface with the patient, with a caregiver, and with the health system? What do those look like? And how do we measure it? And what are the things that we should keep doing and do more of? And what are the things that we should stop doing because it's not as impactful as it could be? So I had this wonderful time period of serving as CEO and the head of patient support, which I think was valuable because it gave me insight into the kind of person who could lead that pillar. And so, for me, what I said to Dr. Kimmel during the interview process, when he became very quickly the lead candidate, and we were just all blown away by him, is that I thought this was the job of a lifetime. You had people who were out in the field, who are passionate about cancer control, who know how to set up a prevention and screening program, who know what it's like to shepherd a patient through a cancer journey because they've got to get transportation, they've got to get navigation, they need to understand their care better, so they need an education strategy. They were really hungry, I would say, for someone to come in to cherish that aspect of ACS and commit to grow it. I was the first person to do that, but Arif Kamal is the second. Dr. Kamal is really phenomenal. And so that's the component of ACS where they're not new activities, but they're activities that have really grown in this last year because now there's a strategy behind them and a real desire to triple, the things that are doing that we know are incredibly impactful. So yeah, that pillar was the last to stand up. But it's not that the activities were new. I just think that it's now got this mindset of what do patients need right now. And okay, if we're going to see more cell-based therapy in the cancer continuum for patients who really need it, then that gap for patients to be next to the center and to be able to get there and afford to stay there is going to grow. So what's our strategy? Where is our next set of hope lodges or hope lodging strategies? And how can we use those hope lodges as a place beyond just a place to stay and to serve as a home, as a community, which they are? It's not like a hotel, but how can we also maximize that ability to improve lives? Can we educate about clinical trials? Can we actually run nutritional studies and physical therapy studies to enhance outcomes while they're there? Some patients stay 200 days free of charge. So so that's the kind of thing that is empowered again by the pillar strategy, because the things that we'll decide to do for how we're touching patients is informed by what's happening with research and was informed by what patients can and can't access.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was interesting looking at how this transformation occurred. I mean, the ACS had a choice. I mean, it could continue in its nosedive, not for very long. Or they could hire a transformational leader who could make it go straight up, not straight up, but at a very nice trajectory. But and the people making the choice were the board, and I had actually never seen the board at ACS really say, "Hey, enough," because at times the board had been captive to the CEO. How looking back, how did this happen? Because this is a brilliant hire.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I wish I had more insight into what their thinking was, but I would say what I very much appreciated about the subcommittee of the board that was the search committee for the CEO was the transparency, because they allowed me the latitude to say, here are the things I really, on the other end, on the receiving end of ACS activities, these are the things I really value. These are the things that concern me. And there are other aspects of the organization that, more internal, that I wanted to understand better and kind of suspected that there were opportunities for improvement. And they took that in stride and were, I would say, very candid to say, yes, we think you're right. We think that there are these things that probably need to be focused on. And so the next set of conversations then that followed were along the lines of, well, I'm not the kind of CEO that's going to come in and babysit. I'm the kind of CEO who's going to come in and be laser focused on improving lives. That is something that I told them before I came in, that this is where I saw the value of the American Cancer Society, and that things would align with that, or we would choose to no longer do some of those activities. And they were supportive. And I have to say, to their credit, now having interacted with the full board, they have been highly supportive. It's what I would call a very good board CEO dynamic. There's trust, there's transparency, and there is good governance. So, the board's just described to me, their role is noses in, hands out. They're going to hold me accountable, as they should.
Mhm.
And they have fiduciary oversight of ACS. Are we executing on mission? Are we using our dollars wisely to execute on mission? Absolutely. That's their role, and it's a good role for them. And of course, their role is to hire and fire me. So, but outside that, the running of the organization is mine and my executive team. And I also suspect that the board sees what I see. I've got an incredible executive team to a T. Each person is serving as the CEO of their part of this organization, and that's what I needed them to do.
Mhm. Oh, that's fascinating. Just thinking back about how that worked in the past, how ACS structures worked in the past, and how it functions, where the rubber met the road. John Seffrin at one point decided that he wanted the big headquarters in the center of Atlanta, which everyone would see, and so this thing was built. It was actually, he didn't decide that. Mackenzie told him that he needed that, and he liked that idea. How does your office look?
We have a very different strategy, again, because we are committed to serving cancer patients and families across the nation. Our structure, back to form follows function, that's our structure too. So Atlanta is where our discovery pillar is located, the intramural team, because we have a team of scientists need a place to be. So they are in Atlanta, and our extramural leadership is in Atlanta as well. So that's a mainstay, but it's not it's not a large headquarters. It's what you would expect for a science team. But advocacy, in our advocacy pillar, has always been headquartered in Washington, D.C., but then appropriately had operations in all 50 state capitals. This is key for us. So, they are distributed across the country according to the activities that we need to conduct. And patient support, by definition, has to be across the country. So, so we have cancer control or cancer support now, vice presidents across the country that lead those teams that touch the patients, touch the caregiver, and touch the health system. So they are distributed across the country, including Hawaii. So, and including in Alaska. So we are, we're in the lower 48, as well as the two that are not connected to mainland US. And each of them has the strategy that's right for the patients in the catchment area. Now, they're led by our chief patient officer, who resides until he chooses not to, will reside in North Carolina. So, all of us have a role to play being out in the field. So that's, I think, been the dynamic change. One of the, I just had my entire executive team, including my chief legal risk officer, including my chief financial officer, at ASCO. Because we get together once a month in person. That's the way we do it. Instead of having a brick and mortar, that's someplace that we all report to, we've hired the best and brightest. And what we're committed to is coming together once a month. We come together for about 2.5 days. And it's some of the most important time that we have. We, of course, connect on Zoom as an executive team every week. And as I think we said when we talked about the first time, on Slack 24/7. But it's the case that time together once a month really helps us with the connective tissue between the pillars that's so critical for us. So we just had a phenomenal time doing that at ASCO with our new chief science officer. So Dr. Dehat joined us for the first time live and in person and in 3D with the executive team, at ASCO. And so we were able to you just get so much more done. So that's the way we operate. I have an office in downtown Philadelphia. I just took a space in what was already the existing ACS office there. And that's my home base, but my true home base is everywhere where we touch lives across the country.
How much travel do you end up doing? It must be a lot.
It's a lot. I am not in Philadelphia very often, as much as I would like to be. It's where the need is. And I think that will change over time, as we sharpen our focus of what our activities are in each of these areas. And I've completed my world tour of cancer centers of understanding how we're connecting appropriately on research, advocacy, and patient support. I think that will ebb and flow, I hope. But I have to say, I'm truly inspired by things that I see across the country. So let me just give you an example. So navigation. So this is something that we know is critically important for us to get together and fund and build the case of support. We see it as igniting navigation, right? We're building the case for this to be a permanent solution. So I can only afford to fund 14 navigators across the country. And our request for applications, we got 200, just shy of 200, right? I mean, that says something about the need for navigation. And what did we ask? We asked these cancer centers to tell us why they need patient navigators. How are you going to deploy them? Tell us about your catchment area. What are the cancer disparities you're trying to address by using a navigator? What is the innovative strategy that you're planning to use? Are you bringing something new to the table for navigation? What is your commitment to clinical trials? You yourself might not need to conduct them, but you need to at least show us that you have a track record and history of referring to someone with clinical trial, because we view assessment for clinical trial as part of advanced, acceptable quality cancer care. So tell us all of these things. So all these applications are coming in, and that's really important. But I've also learned firsthand across the country what some of these really phenomenal strategies look like. So for example, one of the cancer centers that I had gone to was UC Irvine. And I'm sure many other centers do this as well, right? But UC Irvine takes a really interesting strategy on their patient navigation program, which is highly connected to their community outreach and engagement program. Good. So, they have, for example, large communities within their catchment area that are from the Pacific Islands. So they have a navigator who's from that community, who's specifically charged to connect with that community. They have navigators from, specific, Latin America populations that are specifically tied to those communities. So they've really tied patient navigation to their COE office in a way I thought was really phenomenal. So those are the kinds of things that start to come into my mind as we start to think about, a kind of model for patient navigation. The strategies that we'll fund will hopefully help to determine what is the gold standard, what is the thing that is the most effective for patient navigation, and how can we combine that with other research that's happened in the extramural community and use that in advocacy as a case for support. But I think that my ability to go boots on the ground to centers has been kind of irreplaceable to see what is the real need. How are people in a really creative way addressing the needs of their catchment area. And what I find in Iowa is going to be very different than what I find in Orange County, California, because the populations are so different.
Oh, fascinating. What kind of science are you going to do that isn't being done by others? You're looking for that opportunity right now. Have you found it? We've heard a lot, again, so before I left Jefferson, I actually canvassed the cancer center. Every cancer center, I think 90% of the cancer centers responded to my poll, my survey monkey that I wrote myself, right, to say, what should we do more of? And so I have that list of information. Then I've been going around the cancer centers and talking to them about what they'd like to see differently from research. And as you can imagine, there are variances in answers. And I spoke to Dr. Sharpless when he was still the head of the NCI about things that kept him up at night that he wanted to fund more of, but was unable to. So all of that has come to Dr. Dayhut. And no firm decisions have been made yet, because it will be part of our next year plan. But the kinds of things that I will tell you are rising to the top sound like this. Clinical correlates for trials, the kind of trial where you have drug, no money. So you need to be able to do the clinical correlates in order to understand who responded and why.
As part of that, that addresses something that we've heard from a lot of cancer centers, which is the pressure on physician scientists of not having enough protected time to write trials, do trials. So, so by definition, those kind of two things could come together to give a little relief, mental relief for physician scientists to be able to write studies. ACS was the first one in, pre-me, ACS was the first one in to recognize the plight of early career investigators. And so we went to that space. We funded early career investigators, and then ultimately, granting agencies like the NCI also gave an expanded pay line. So what we've heard from many centers, and in fact, many faculty, is the pressure of someone who's sitting on an R01. They already have one R01, but you can't run a lab these days on one R01. They need the second. And so can we think differently about that pool that gets, stuck in the middle, is there. But then the other component, which is really also highly tied to our mission, is diversity of the pipeline. So, so what can we do to enhance diversity of those going into cancer research as well as cancer care? And so, we've already committed millions of dollars to HBCUs to try to get earlier intervention of an exposure of individuals to what a career in cancer looks like. And so those I expect will continue, but we've had some just really interesting conversations at ASCO with another organization thinking about funding grants in the post-bac area as well, that to try to get more exposure of individuals from diverse backgrounds and diverse geographies to cancer research. So I would say I would not look for something to disappear from the ACS portfolio. We'd like to grow the overall grant portfolio, and as we do, to bring in new opportunities for growth. So the final thing I would say is innovation. So again, with our concept that we would like to measurably improve lives, one thing the ACS has not gone into in the past as much as it could have is the kind of implementation science that uses things like digital technologies to enhance the patient experience or patient understanding of their care. Things like digital navigation start to become important to us. So I would look for us to find best and brightest ideas across the cancer continuum, but also to judge whether or not we are uniquely positioned to do that versus another agency or organization, which we think would be distinct. And I would also say, that the commitment to health equity also, that has to rise to the top. Something that could demonstrably enhance health equity if it's going to rise to the top of ACS, as guided by our Chief Diversity Officer. And when appropriate, I'd love to talk about her, because that's also something new about ACS that probably has not gotten enough airtime.
Oh, I'd love to hear that. Another thing that didn't get enough airtime, and I'm sorry we didn't write enough about it, but the patient information systems that you put together with ASCO, that probably took all of maybe 30 minutes of negotiations, and it was done because you could do it. I couldn't imagine it being done before, because people would be looking for where's the knife,
This is something that really was quite facile to stand up, and it's because of the commitment of myself and Dr. Hudis from ASCO. I was just delighted that I think I hadn't even started yet at ACS, but I had been announced that I was joining the organization, and Cliff Hudis, whom I knew in the past, from my life as a cancer center director and researcher, had contacted me and said, Karen, when it's the right time, let's talk about things to do together. And I said, absolutely. Let me get in the door so I can understand what I'm dealing with, and then let's talk. So we made good on that commitment. And it was just he and I, and we did what you would expect. We had a small brainstorm of what are the things that we can do together that bring value added. And this concept of empowering a wider array of individuals with information through a relatively easy data share online could bring value. So we loved the idea. We each agreed to go bring it to our teams. Our teams enjoyed the idea. we stayed on the task force, he and I, through the point to make sure that there was just no logistical barrier, no technical barrier that would keep us from doing it. And when we realized that there was not, we unleashed our teams on each other. They worked together beautifully, and out came this project. You're right. It was, I don't want to use the word easy, but because I wasn't the one having to do the code in the background, okay? But it was easy, and in terms of where we wanted to go. So here was our thinking. From Dr. Huddis's position, their key stakeholder is the clinical realm, is our physicians, everything from oncology to primary care, to give detailed information about cancer. But they also have something that we were not as strong in, which was survivorship plans. And again, as much as we're reducing cancer mortality, we're enhancing the number of cancer survivors, good. But those individuals need to have guidance on what are the additional things that they're going to need to continue and contend with downstream of their last successful treatment. On the flip side, our stakeholder are patients and families. So our content about cancer is written in a way that is meant to be easily understood by everyone, but and to stand up as well the cancer continuum that starts with prevention and screening. So our thought process was like this: if we could cross-populate cancer.org, our site, and cancer.net, their site, we bring value on each end of the spectrum: prevention and screening coming from ACS, survivorship coming from ASCO. And because we have a Venn diagram where there's an overlap of the kind of person who accesses our material, a patient or a survivor who really wants to get much more deeply into, for example, standard of care detail, they can find that now through this cross-populated site. And for us, to have additional information that's being viewed by, especially on prevention and screening, by those that are in the care arena, was a goal as well. So it was just a net win. Mm-hmm. And what it required us to do was to put aside our egos and not get into the conversation about branding and who owns what, but rather do the right thing for the patient. It's one of the things I really love about ASCO and ACS is that, it's exemplified by the leadership. We're driven by what is doing the right thing, period. And as long as we can afford it, we're going to go do it. Mm-hmm. So that was step one. Was mm-hmm. awesome.
Yeah, it must have, the whole sort of critical part of the conversation must have taken less than an hour.
It did. It really did. Well, I also really enjoy, Dr. Huddis has such a terrific business mind also, that we've had, without betraying confidences, we've had a lot of times to touch point with each other, CEO to CEO, about variances in our organization. Like, how do you do this? And how do you do that? And use each other as guides for just a sounding board, which is frankly, I think, the way organizations should run. I would say, we also have, I don't want to discount, we have really wonderful relationships with AACI, again, because the centers, become our priorities. We've had conversations with Astro about radiation oncology studies not being funded enough. So we put together, a grant mechanism with Astro. So, when I sat in the White House the day that the moonshot reignition was being announced, and Dr. Huddis was in there too, and President Biden talked about the need for cancer organizations to work together more deeply, I kind of thought, we're there, right? We're doing this, and we believe that. So yeah, and we'll do more.
It's easier than not.
Well, it is, as long as you're driven by the strategy of what's the right thing. And in our case, that thing is patients and families. And so, finding those like-minded individuals to get things done, that's what we're going to do.
So the other question you mentioned briefly, Ukraine.
Yeah.
I talked with Arif Kamal about when this was all kind of beginning, and he mentioned that we're doing this as part of the program, not as part of fundraising. And in the past, ACS would have run ads, if they could have stood up a campaign fast enough, saying, give us money so we could give it to Ukraine cancer patients. How did that come about? How did your response to Ukraine happen?
Yeah, it happened really quickly, actually. So the day, in the days after the invasion started, we actually had our executive team meeting in Philadelphia, and my office is at Philadelphia. And so Dr. Kimmel and I were there. And as part of our executive team meeting, I said, look, what can we do? Back to our mindset. What is it that ACS is uniquely positioned to do? And educate, we were aware that there are about 176,000 newly diagnosed cases every year of cancer in Ukraine. So our mind went to, okay, well, we have about 176,000 people who've been diagnosed in that last 12 months that are either on the precipice of starting treatment or are in the middle of treatment and are going to be displaced. We've got to do something. What's going to be on their mind? What's going to be on their mind is how can I continue treatment? And our goal was to reduce the number of individuals who had to stop care. So we realized an asset that we have is cancer.org, where we have information, but it's all in English. So what can we do to get key pieces of information translated and especially over to our 24/7 call center, which previously could only be assessed from the US because there's a cost to opening up multiple lines. So we made the decision quickly in the executive team that we would take dollars from the organization that were allocated to other programs and immediately put into Ukraine. So Dr. Kimmel and I left the room. I called my previous cancer center, Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center, because we had oncologists that spoke Polish, that spoke Russian, that were from Ukraine, who knew the languages, and asked them if they could immediately help us translate, including messages that were on our 24/7 line that could tell someone, leave us what you need to know. We're going to get back to you with information. So all that got stood up within about 48 hours. And immediately that same day, I also called Dr. Hudis from ASCO and said, look, here's our intention. Our intention is to create a conduit channel where someone can talk to us, reach out to us. And we have some oncologists downstream of that again came from Jefferson, but we need more. We need a bullpen of oncologists. He said, I'm going to find them. And so he then started to scour at ASCO, and that's how it started to come together. And then ultimately other organizations joined in this strategy as well. So at the end, what do we have? We have a website where we were looking at the numbers a few days ago. Since we started it, more than 35,000 people have come to the website. Oh. Almost 1,000 have downloaded information in different languages from the area. So they're taking advantage of the patient information. We have navigated through our chat line and through our 24/7 call line now with 6 different call numbers, all with a high price point we're willing to pay. We've navigated 200 patients to care, so that they're able to find a place to continue their care. So we're just delighted by the impact of what we've been able to do. So I mean, the 200 we were hand curating, but that the 800 that received the information and downloaded, and then 35,000 accessing online, we know we're making an impact. So the durability of this is such that we now have a clinical volunteer core that was again made possible through that relationship with ASCO, so that in the event there is the next world disaster that prevents someone from accessing cancer care, that we're able to pull and connect from that volunteer core, and we know what their language capabilities are. So it's something that actually we have not gone to raise money for. Everything we do at ACS comes from funds raised. So at some point we're going to have to determine how we're going to sustainably keep this going. But it was a do the right thing moment. And I would say this as well. We sat at the team and said, well, is there any risk to the organization if we do this? What if someone is navigated to care and there something poor happens? And do we have any legal reliability? And even our chief legal and risk officer said, this is the equivalent of people choking on a plane. We've got to do the right thing here. Let's move forward, and we'll figure it out. And he did figure out the legal structures behind it. But I give my team credit for understanding how quickly we were able to move, and that having that sense of urgency that we have to do something now, we can't wait.
I'm just mopping up the odds and ends here, but I understand you found the time capsule that Mrs. Lasker put together.
So
what does it look like?
The time capsule looks like you would expect it to look like. I'll invite you to Philadelphia to have a look. I actually can send you a picture of the time capsule as well. But it's interesting. So it's bigger than I thought it would be. It's, you know, several feet high, big black, you know, looks like a time capsule from the era. And we have no idea what's in it. So it's definitely an object of much speculation within my team about what could possibly be inside this thing.
God, you got to have some kind of a metric for when you would open it, because it was going to be, it was intended to be opened when they cured cancer, which would have been roughly 1976. So yeah. So you know, so when they cure cancer, for sure. But we're, you know, now that we know cancer is at least 200, you know, individual diseases, we're not sure what to make of that. But we started to talk about it as when we cure cancer as we know it, and we're not there yet. Well, then we'll know it in a different way, and then it's still there. But what about money? How is that working out? Is it going up?
Going up. And you know, so we beat our plan by about 30% last year. We're having a really good year this year. And I think it is but the most important part about that is that the dollars are going back out the door. We're putting more dollars into mission than we ever have, you know, or than have happened in the last many years. And in terms of what we were able to do last year, we realized toward the end of the year, when we were doing very well, we had more dollars that we could put out into mission. So we did. And so we, again, you know, thought deeply as an executive team, all right, if we've got more money to go out the door, what is the highest and best use of funds? What's the thing that right now is really going to help a patient or family? And because of the pandemic, and because of so many individuals were behind on either cancer care or cancer screening, those dollars largely went into patient transportation and lodging toward the end of the year, so that we could get more patients to care. So that's and it was across the country. So I hope we have the same problem this year, that at the end of the year we're able to say, okay, what can we do for advocacy, discovery, and for patient support at the end of the year that's above and beyond what we had been able to plan.
Well, but please note that it took a lot of self-control for me not to ask this question first. But what are the numbers? Can you give them to me yet, or is
I can't? I have to wait for our audit committee is actually meeting later this month, and then we'll have the audited financials from last year, and then I can give them out.
But you're happy. I mean,
yes, we're very. As I said, we released more dollars into mission, so we had a great year.
Wow. So actually, the just having bucks follow mission is actually a functional approach.
We're very clear on what it is that we do and what we want to achieve. And I think that transparency is being heard, and the impact is being heard. Paul, before you go,
Yeah.
Can we talk about my Chief Diversity Officer?
Oh, please, let's do this.
Yeah. So one of the, you know, I know we talked about the pillars, and the pillars as being a new construct within ACS, and each having this lead that's the strategist at the top. But foundational underneath all of that is our commitment to health equity, and that is run by our Chief Diversity Officer, Tawana Thomas Johnson. She is the first Chief Diversity Officer at the American Cancer Society. And the way that she is positioned, her role on the executive team is, I would say, empowered almost to the point of mind to influence everything that we do at the American Cancer Society. So when we are going to stand up a new research program, it is her role to ensure that all of those research studies are maximizing our ability to enhance health equity. And she holds us all accountable for that. So for each pillar decision, Tawana, in her role as Chief Diversity Officer, is influencing what we are doing. But then she also has her own body of work and in fact, I guess I should back up by saying, in our strategic plan, it is notable that every metric by which we say success looks like, that we're being held accountable by the board, every one of those trues up to a known cancer disparity that we're trying to resolve. So it's not that there's just this thing over here we do on the side that's reducing cancer equity. It's she's achieved through our strategic plan what I think is optimal. It's woven through the fabric of everything that we do. But then she also has her own programs that she runs above and beyond that again float beyond between the pillars. She has her program, for example, on health equity ambassadors. So she's worked with community partners to develop a core of health equity ambassadors that then became trained to go work out into the community to, for example, talk about the importance of breast cancer screening in the Black American population, informed by research, right? Informed by our cancer facts and figures for this last year, which showed that for the first time, breast cancer is starting to surmount lung cancer in terms of cause of death for Black women. Okay, so then we've got to get people into prevention and screening. That's the right time for them. So being informed by research, that becomes a priority for Tawana and her team and her health equity ambassadors. This is something she continues to grow, and I would say has been just a force throughout the nation of positives that's coming behind her ability to galvanize communities through these ambassadors. She's someone that, should you ever choose, is definitely worth a conversation and getting to know. She is a hero.
Absolutely. Let's do that. Let's do the conversation with her. And let's just talk to her throughout the kind of like as part of the coverage.
Well, interestingly, and I think you'll find this interesting, she's been at ACS a long time. I want to say close to 15 years. So she's been at the organization. She's seen it through multiple, phases and iterations, even back when it was a federated model. And so when I met her, I think day 3 on the job, I thought, oh, this is a woman who is poised for greatness. And so she and I talked about what does, because this is a pretty weighty role at ACS, what does a chief diversity officer look like? And how can she be just like maximally empowered to influence everything that we do? We thought deeply about that job description. And then when she met with everybody on the executive team, before we finalized the job description for the chief diversity officer, we made sure everyone really knew, like, this woman is really going to be empowered to influence every decision that you are making, because that's the right thing for patients and families. And it's just worked out beautifully. She's amazing.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me.